Welcome to FUNC YOU UP, the podcast that gives you the best of functional medicine, nutrition, and wellness in 8 minutes or less.
Hey everyone, welcome to FUNC YOU UP. This is Michelle Miller, clinical nutritionist.
And this is Diana Orchant, functional medicine registered dietitian-to.
We are so excited for you to join us today because we are going to talk about a topic that I think it's common in our society. We talk about it all the time, but I don't think we really truly understand it. Today we're going to talk about blood pressure and hypertension. So let's start with some just basics, like what is blood pressure? The way I like to think about it is your heart is beating and it's pumping your blood throughout your body. And so for that to be able to happen, for your blood to be able to be pumped from your heart down through all your limbs, down throughout your body to the other side, there needs to be pressure as that element that's going to force that through to help with your circulation and keep that movement going in your body. Now, that's a delicate balance to maintain because you don't want the pressure to be too tight. That would put strain on the heart muscle, but you also need it to be pumping enough where you can get that blood moving throughout your whole body. So break down, Diana, for us all. I know when most people listening to this have probably had their blood pressure taken before. There's two numbers that you get reported back to you. Kind of break down what those numbers why those are significant, what those are standing for.
So you have systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So the top number, the first number you usually see, is the systolic pressure, which is really the first force that occurs as the blood pumps out of the heart and into the arteries. The second force, which is the bottom number, is the diastolic pressure. So it's created as the heart rests in between heartbeats.
So this gives us a good way of assessing, is your blood pressure okay? Is this all circulating at an appropriate pace? So a lot of people are familiar with the 120/80, and that's kind of the general guideline that we try to go by. But these numbers have been changing. So Diana, tell me a little about what's happening there.
So I think it was about last year, the American Heart Association actually changed these numbers. So what people thought was kind of pre-hypertension has now become hypertension. So what's now normal is less when your blood pressure is under 120/80. So 120/80 is now considered high or pre-hypertension. And then hypertension is now diagnosed at 130/80 or greater. And this is usually diagnosed during 2 or more office visits or 2 or more times taking your blood pressure.
And the cool thing is, this is something that you can really assess and test at home. You can get your own blood pressure monitor. You can do this in the comfort of your own home. It's not an expensive test. It's not a scary scan that you have to schedule in advance and go in for. Like, you could do this, day after day in your own home. So there's no reason that anyone shouldn't be aware of like where their blood pressure tends to lie. Because I know a lot of people talk about like white coat syndrome when you go into the doctor's office and you get a little nervous, or maybe you had a stressful commute there, that your blood pressure might be higher. A good way to really assess that is just take it at home, a couple times in the morning, a couple times at night, different days of the week, and just get a good average across the board. Now, there are a ton of people with high blood pressure, and I actually wasn't even aware of how high the stats were until Diana was telling me. So explain to our listeners kind of how common high blood pressure really is at this point.
It's very common. It's actually alarmingly common.
Yeah.
So 1 in every 3 adults has hypertension, and that's over 50 million adults. And while that number is really high, only about half of these people actually have their condition under control, which is pretty upsetting considering the number of people that are on medications.
So, and we know that conventional medicine will, often give you a couple options. They'll say like, cut your salt, try to lose a couple pounds, but take this medication. And when we were kind of preparing for this episode, we were just looking through a lot of studies, and I was finding a lot of like patient brochures that were telling the patients like, it's likely it's not likely that you'll be able to get this down on your own, or that you'll ever have normal blood pressure today, which is insane because this is totally preventable and totally within our control. I mean, yes, conventional medicine is going to give you a medication for it, but later on, we're going to share some tips on how to get this down naturally and how to take control of your blood pressure. But there are kind of two main medications that are given. So Diana, take us through what those are.
So they're ACE inhibitors. That's usually the first line of defense. And then diuretics. The problem with some of these medications is that they're kind of this, or they actually tend to be aiming to be more of this quick fix, and they're not actually getting to the root cause, right, which is actually where nutrition and lifestyle change really comes in. But with these medications, you also have a ton of different side effects. So you could have a bunch of different nutrient depletions, an imbalance of electrolytes, especially with those diuretics. You could be low in calcium, magnesium, potassium, which we'll go into is so key right now with hypertension.
Yeah.
And then nutrients like zinc and vitamin D. You could really be deficient in some of these items based on the medication that you're taking.
So that's frustrating, right? It's like, here you are, you find out you have high blood pressure, you follow your doctor's orders, you go on a medication, and then you end up becoming, depleting some of these really key essential nutrients from your body. And then on top of that, you also might have side effects, which honestly, any medication is going to have side effects. That's just the nature of how they work. But I think what's frustrating is it's side effects from a medication due to a condition that is preventable, that's lifestyle induced, it's lifestyle based. So a lot of the common symptoms of some of these medications might be dizziness or fatigue or cough or a headache. Why put up with that if we can take control and do this on our own? Now, I do think it's really important to state, just in light of the COVID crisis, that we are hearing a lot about hypertension, high blood pressure being a very common coexisting condition with a lot of patients right now. And basically the idea here is that, and there's a lot going back and forth just in terms of the ACE2 receptors. And to be honest, I think it is far too early to make claims on that. But what we do know from the data so far, as of beginning of May, when we're recording this, is that patients who are not doing well tend to have this is one of the underlying conditions they have. So I don't know, Diana, if you want to speak too much more to that, but we do know that having hypertension is not helping the situation.
Absolutely. And we're really seeing that among patients who have COVID-19, those with high blood pressure tend to have more complications, end up in the ICU, be vented, things like that, versus patients who have a more mild version of this virus. So we definitely think now's the time while we can. This virus seems to not be going anywhere anytime soon. So now's really the time to take control while you're at home. And this can happen. These changes can happen in your kitchen or in your living room doing some physical activity. And now is really the time to take a stance against it and make a change.
It's so true. And you will hear us repeat this a million times during this episode, that this is in your control. I'm so used to clients coming to me and having to talk about this topic because so many of them will say, well, high blood pressure runs in my family, or I have the gene for high blood pressure. It's like, I don't even know if they've had genetic testing done, but that is not true. So let me just break down that myth a little bit. Now, I am sure there is a very, very, very small subset of people who have less control over their blood pressure due to genetic, predispositions and, the way their genes are expressing. But we have to understand that when we think about genes, I always explain it to my clients as it's like a light switch that's on a dimmer, and your environment is responsible for turning that dimmer up or turning that dimmer down. So yes, genetically speaking, you may have a hereditary, genetic component where a lot of people in your family, if you are all expressing your genes in a certain way, have a higher chance of high blood pressure. But that this idea of like, oh, high blood pressure runs in my family, it's much more likely that obesity runs in your family, or that eating a lot of processed foods runs in your family, or sleep apnea runs in your family. And those are the environmental contributing factors that are then turning on and expressing this gene for high blood pressure. So I hope that isn't too technical. I hope that makes sense. And it's a little bit of tough love on my part when I have to explain this to a patient, because I think it's a little bit of like a scapegoat. I think it's an easy way out of just saying like, oh, this is how things are for me. And that's really not the case. You have so much more power than that. So Diana, let's dive into kind of what we know some of these interventions are, some of these things we know that can really help turn around our blood pressure.
So let's get to the root cause, which is our favorite way of addressing different disease states, different things going on. So the first is going to be cut the processed foods. And the real reason for this is, there's so many other ingredients that are going to cause so many other issues, but for hypertension specifically, we're talking about all of that sodium that's packed into those processed foods. Because it's really not necessarily the salt that you're adding to your food, right? You're just like adding a little bit of salt maybe to your eggs in the morning. That's not what's going to get you. It's the salt that's added by the food corporations that's meant to add to this flavor that you may not even realize is salt. And sodium is really one of the key items, which I'm sure a lot of you have heard, that can increase your blood pressure. And the way that I always think of it is that we're really not supposed to be having more than 1 teaspoon of salt a day, which is equivalent to 2,000 milligrams, which is wild.
A teaspoon of salt. Let's let that soak in, folks. I mean, it's, salt is one of the main foods one of the main components that's going to make a food taste better. So if you're at a restaurant, if you're getting a packaged food, like they want you to continue to come back and get that food because they want it to have an enhanced effect on you. And by doing that, it's either going to be sugar or salt or fat. And in so many cases, it's salt. So a teaspoon, that is wild.
And when you think about what's in your soups, the average soup contains 1,400 to 1,800 milligrams, which sprinkle a little more salt in or to any other food today, and you're already well over 2,000.
Yeah.
And not to mention your deli meats, your cured meats, all those condiments and things that you're adding to your packaged foods already, or maybe just that bag of chips that you had as a snack today. It all adds up.
That's a major one. If your first approach, if you said, okay, I have high blood pressure, I want to take control of this, your first step is to cut out packaged foods, processed foods. And that means eating foods with minimal ingredients that are going to go bad. So your cured meats are going to stay good for way too long. Your packaged foods that you stocked up in at the beginning of this quarantine, like that's the foods we're talking about. You got to clear those out, and you got to get back to the foods that are going to go bad quickly, because those are fresh, real foods. Now, also within that list I want to talk about potassium. This is one of my favorite topics when it comes to high blood pressure. Salt gets all the attention, and I get it, but the idea is really we got to keep this potassium salt balance, or sodium rather. We're getting our sodium from the salt. So even a lot of the high blood pressure medications will try to keep your sodium levels down and keep your body's natural potassium levels higher, because potassium is really relaxing, and it helps to relax the blood vessels, which then relaxes your blood pressure, versus the excess sodium constricting the blood vessels and causing a higher blood pressure. So potassium really relaxing. Other minerals like magnesium can have a similar effect. But some of the richest sources of potassium that could counterbalance this would be your fresh vegetables, your leafy green vegetables, anything from kale, Swiss chard, spinach, broccoli is one of my favorite, Brussels sprouts, even things like avocado, green beans, tomatoes. These are packed with good potassium. And we're not, like Diana made this point to me earlier today, it's like everyone thinks banana, right? When they think about potassium, get out of here with that, all right? Get out of here with your banana bread and your and your bananas, and go get the leafy green vegetables. Go get your good green vegetables, because we're gonna see this keep coming up. That basically these green vegetables give us everything we need. So yes, I want to talk about potassium, but also I really quick want to make a mention. Your table salt that you have at home is just that sodium chloride blend, versus if you also made the switch over to Himalayan salt, real sea salt, you are getting those naturally occurring minerals along with the sodium, and that's going to give you a better balance also. So like the table salt that you're using is just pure sodium chloride. That's throwing off your balance also, versus if you go to get some like beautiful Himalayan sea salt, the pink salt, that's going to be more naturally occurring with some of these other blends of minerals, so that it's not going to be quite as hit to the system, even if you want to sprinkle a little salt onto a meal.
You're also not going to find that salt in processed foods. They're not using beautiful Himalayan sea salt in your chips that you're having.
Oh, someday, hopefully. So what are some of the other nutrients we want to be on the lookout for?
So the first one that I want to mention is folate, which I find so fascinating. One of the studies that we were looking at was a nurse's health study, which found that women consuming the highest amounts of folate from their diet and from supplements, either diet or supplements, and where they exceeded over 1 gram of folate a day, had 1/3 of the risk of developing hypertension than women consuming less than 200 milligrams a day, which is pretty low.
That's incredible.
It's really wild, because we don't always think about folate is B vitamin. We don't necessarily think about that would have any impact on something as distant as blood pressure.
But lay it on them. What are the good sources of folate?
So you guessed it, green leafy vegetables. So what else is in green leafy vegetables? We got that potassium, that magnesium, not to mention all those amazing phytonutrients.
Okay, so then one step further, green leafy vegetables, things like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, are also high in vitamin C. And we know that vitamin C is great for preventing blood pressure from rising too much.
Yeah, so with everyone hopping on the vitamin C wagon right now, it's great. Hopefully it's bringing down some of that hypertension.
That would be a silver lining for sure. And we talk about this all the time, but I also do want to talk about some other foods outside of just like oranges. We think of like oranges as the food that we get the most vitamin C from, but also share with our listeners some of your favorite sources for vitamin C, other than just like the leafy green vegetables, the broccoli.
Yeah, so I think the most common that people might think of is bell peppers. So whether you're getting green, red, yellow, those different colors actually have different amounts, but they're all high in vitamin C. Yeah. And there's also broccoli, which we love for many reasons. Mm-hmm. Brussels sprouts again, cauliflower, spinach, cabbage, turnip greens. We're getting into the leafy green category once again.
I love it. So these are kind of like a step, one step at a time. You kind of make these changes in your diet, and hopefully as you're making these changes, you will be consuming an anti-inflammatory diet. You will find it may be easier to get a little bit of physical activity in, because we know that physical activity can also help with monitoring or managing your blood pressure. And Diana, what are the recommendations you'll usually give our clients?
Usually I'll say aiming for 150 minutes per week or 30 minutes per day works as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, and we talk a lot about this, quarantine, we're all like, all right, where do we get our physical activity? And we talk a lot about this in our last episode 35, where we talk about our top 5 tips of quarantine, where we work in trying to get in some physical activity every single day.
So now someone's eating a little bit healthier, they're working out a little bit more, getting that physical activity up, and hopefully that will allow for their body weight to adjust a little bit healthier too. We know that when people are overweight, their blood pressure is higher, and that makes sense. As your mass expands, it's going to take more pressure to push that blood throughout your body. There's further to go. There's a little bit more stress on the system, potentially more inflammation in the body. So decreasing body weight in a healthy way is also going to help to naturally decrease and manage that blood pressure. And then we also know that there are just a handful of other tips that are really effective in managing blood pressure. Take us through what some of those lifestyle management aspects are.
Yeah, so stopping smoking, or not starting if you haven't started before, especially now at this point in time. If you can stop smoking or at least decreasing your usage, that's going to be huge for hypertension. Also reducing excessive alcohol use. So if you're having, more than a couple glasses of wine a night or a couple glasses of alcohol, pulling that back, and not having maybe too many on the weekends as well. And the last one is just stress reduction. So if you think about what Michelle was saying earlier, that, a lot of people have this white coat syndrome, that's because they're anxious, they're stressed, right? Like you walk into the doctor's office and they say, well, maybe wait until the end of the appointment when you're just like a little calmer, you've been sitting there, you're not running to the appointment. So yeah, that's stress reduction techniques are really big here too, whether that be meditation, which you can hear about in all our previous episodes, or just deep breathing in general.
And it's just amazing. I mean, you think about, the different dietary steps we just talked about, physical activity, reducing stress, like just those three pillars, the amount of other aspects of that ripple out effect, right, that would have on your total body health, not just your blood pressure. It makes sense. These are such common tips. We're probably going to people are sick of hearing about them in a way, but it's like, they're there for a reason. They keep popping up for a reason because we really know they make a difference. So I hope you feel empowered after listening to this. I hope you feel that, if you don't know what your blood pressure is, you could take it yourself, order yourself a little machine. Again, I mean, they're relatively accurate, and take it a couple times throughout the day, take it a couple, days of the week, and kind of get a sense of what your average is. And then, I mean, it's your body. You're responsible we're all responsible for these vessels we get to ride through life with. So make sure it's as healthy as you can be, and just know that you have the power to control something like this. Keep yourself off of medication. And I mean, at the end of the day, it's going to decrease your risk of a lot of other comorbidities that we find hypertension tends to be associated with.
So thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to hear from you. If you have feedback, questions, just want to say hi, let us know. You can reach out to us at FUNCYouUp@physiologicnyc.com, or you can reach out to us on our Instagram at physiologicnyc.
And as always, you can continue to follow me on Instagram at MichelleMiller_MSACN for more functional medicine and nutrition tips. We're so glad you guys stopped by today. We will catch you soon. Take care.
Bye.
You've been listening to Funk You Up. Be sure to like, review, and subscribe for more daily tips on living well.